which is informational updates from the administration on item number 1. So I don't know if the mayor or if Rachel Otto, the chief of staff, wants to lead off on that.
I'm happy to. I think there's a slide deck that council staff has. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, for always making time for us. Can go on to the next slide. We've been back in the high transmission level for a few weeks now, and the numbers continue to climb. Our 7-day average is up at 950 cases a day, which is pretty far beyond where we were at this time last year. Our ICU referrals and that COVID ICU utilization at 29%, you'll recall that the state's standards before the endgame legislation were that we not get beyond 15% COVID ICU utilization. And we're at 29% at this point, dangerously high for the medical providers to be able to handle. Let's go to the next slide, please. We're going to add metrics going forward for you, Council, on infection rates with our unvaccinated children. We had 133 test positive just since Monday, and that's 91 of those 133 are under 10 years old. So in just a moment, I'll talk to you a little bit about what is being seen in other school districts across the country that have been open for a couple of weeks. But we'll continue to provide these for you in the future. And if there's any other child-related COVID infection information that you'd like to see, please let us know, and we'll incorporate it into that slide. Next slide, please. Here's the vaccination rates that we update as of council meeting dates for you. And the climb is less dramatic than we'd like to be given the infection rates that are climbing, but still seeing a nice increase in 84116 from 41% to 44% fully vaccinated. 72, and as a city, we're Rachel might have to correct me, but I think as a city, we're still just under 50% fully vaccinated on a total average.
Mayor, that's about right. And 84101 is, I think, our highest rate has our highest rate of vaccinations right now, although the population is pretty small there, but still a really good figure there.
Thank you. Next slide. Here's that demographic breakdown also that we bring to each council meeting. And the next slide, please. There are more vaccination events, and they will continue to be opportunities for our most impacted areas in the city to hopefully conveniently access free vaccinations. Here's some of them coming up, and we would appreciate council support through your newsletters and other communication venues to get these opportunities out there to the community. Next slide. And Andrew Johnston will take it from here on these, and then I'll jump back in, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind after that.
Thank you, Mayor. You'll see the table of the census at the resource centers as of last week, the 9th. Overall, we're running at 88% total capacity. You can see that's higher in Salt Lake City at the King Women's Resource Center and the Miller Co-ed. Again, we've talked about this before, that this is a one-time snapshot each day that's taken. It doesn't necessarily reflect reserved beds, particularly the Men's Resource Center, or folks who came in for partial nights. They may not be counted completely in that census. So we're still running close to 90%, which is the overall objective right now. And to jump on this point, we are still working on additional overflow capacity for this coming winter. We are working at both a very low barrier concept like we have it at St. Vincent de Paul's every winter, where you have mats on floors, folks come in, in various states of intoxication or otherwise, as well as medical specific beds. We know there's still a need for that in the community, and increasingly we are seeing more need for quarantine and isolation beds. We had a large facility last year downtown that was used, I believe, countywide, but we discontinued that. We, as in the whole system, the health department and the county, have taken the lead on this. And we are, the system is seeing an increase in folks who need that Q&I at this point, kind of jumping out what the mayor's talked about with infection rates. So we will have some medical beds we're working on in the overflow options going forward, in addition to quarantine and isolation options that Forest Free Medical Clinic is operating. Next slide, please. This is the most recent resource fair we held at Fairmount Park. The city leads these, and you can see a lot of the providers who joined us: Odyssey House, Advanced Services, UTA, the Justice Courts, Rough Haven, which does pets, and lunches, and other folks. One thing that I want to point out, Advantage Services does both street cleanings. They also do our transportation between the resource centers, the shuttle service. They hire from those who are currently unsheltered or formerly homeless individuals. So it's a nice way to quickly engage folks at the resource fairs who are unsheltered, who need access to income and jobs. And you can see there are some hires coming directly at those fairs. You can also see the other partners at the bottom, the Other Side Village. We've talked about the tiny village a little bit. They're there talking to folks who are unsheltered about access into their plans and ensuring that their plans meet the needs of those who are on the street, as well as building up the knowledge about the tiny home villager concepts that they're working on. It'll take a while to get there, but they are doing active outreach. The road home, obviously, with veterans and family services. And we talk a lot about mental health services through Valley Behavioral Health, substance use services through Odyssey and VOA, as well as the Community Connections team through the police department. And for your information, the next kayak court will be held this coming Friday on the 20th, and they'll be focusing again most likely on a really heavily populated area of the river, probably north of North Temple. That's all I have, Mayor.
I think we'll have Chief go next for a police update, and then I'll wrap it up.
All right. Good afternoon, Council, and thank you, Mayor. It's good to see you after a couple weeks off. We wanted to give an update a little bit on our body-worn camera program and what we're doing. Just to kind of, if you can start our slide deck. Next slide. To speak a little bit about the history of the body-worn camera system here in Salt Lake City and specifically in the PD, we started using the Axon cameras back in 2013, and they provide the city, the taxpayers, and the community with an important level of accountability and transparency. We have more than 550 body-worn cameras in our department. Everybody within the department has one, even myself. And so in this day and age, I really honestly feel it's a mandatory component of policing, and Salt Lake City and the Salt Lake City Police Department has been on the right side of history for many, many years. I don't know how any agency can afford or would do police work without the cameras. But as with any program, it's only as good as the policies and the procedures that guide its use. Salt Lake City has good policies and procedures. All officers are required to wear, next slide, I'm sorry. All officers are required to wear our body-worn cameras while they're on duty, and that includes when they're working a part-time job. They're also required to activate their cameras and audio before any law enforcement encounter with the public, or as quickly as possible. And as you know, sometimes events happen so quickly that once the camera is activated, it actually goes back into time for 30 seconds and captures what occurred 30 seconds prior, because that camera is always in a recording mode. An officer is not permitted to deactivate their body-worn camera or to mute the audio without first stating on the record the reason for deactivating or muting. And according to the Matrix Audit, our body-worn policy is clearly written and incorporates Utah State Code, which was really important to them and the audit they conducted for us. Next slide. As with our CompStat and the many things that we do here within the PD, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so within the department, we have an inspection and audit squad, and it's headed up by Sergeant Mason Givens. Now, if you go back in a few years ago, we started in 2019 with this program, and it really was just a random sampling where we looked at 4 officers' videos per week, 2 videos over the course of 52 weeks, which is about 415 videos. Again, it was a random sampling and didn't really measure everybody's use of the camera and their compliance. So, Mayor, in talking with you and your staff, we talked about moving that up to 100% of the officers audited per year. And so we have taken that that charge, and we now take all 557 officers when we're at full staffing, and we review 2 of their videos. So it's 1,140 videos. It could be at a maximum capacity every year. So I just wanted to let you know that we are actively auditing the body-worn camera program to ensure its compliance. And then I'd like to turn the time over to Sergeant Mason Givens and let him kind of speak a little more in depth as to what we review and measure.
Thanks, Chief. You can go to the next slide, please. So this slide has a graphic of an Excel spreadsheet to kind of give you a grasp, maybe a better idea of what we're looking for. I apologize, you probably can't read a lot of what's on there. So I'm gonna have to fill in some of the gaps here. And also there are several black boxes there, those are redactions, just because there are case numbers and addresses associated with this and names. So for the purposes of this meeting today, we feel like we could probably just talk about the meat and ignore the potatoes, if you will. So looking at this spreadsheet, you'll see a sampling, a snapshot from this document of what we've done in 2021. And to include it, it tracks the officer that's being, or I'll say the employee, because it's not just officers. We have literally audited Chief Brown as well. I had mine about 3 weeks ago. I met with my lieutenant and he reviewed my my performance as well. So we really are doing everybody. We'll track the camera. We'll track the division, the supervisors that are notified that have to perform the review, and we also track the amount of days it takes for the review to occur. So there's a lot of data that's captured in here as well. When we send it, we have a form that goes with it, and there are check boxes. And what you're seeing in this middle portion here with all these red dots, yes and no's and all that, are those checkpoints that are captured and tracked throughout there. So if you can scroll, whoever's got the mouse over to the right, you'll start seeing some of these big boxes. There's comment sections in there. We track actions taken by supervisors, whether the employee was given a commendation for how they performed on the call, or whether training or coaching was provided. All of that will be on here statistically as well. And then, as I mentioned, from a management perspective, we track how many days it takes for signatures and reviews and whatnot. And we break it out over both calls that are selected for the audit. So it's not just we're looking at that officer as a whole, we're looking individually at every single component of the audit. It's a very robust, very thorough audit. We've now broken it into quarters so that we can meet our reporting requirements for the ordinance as well. So there's a lot of good data here, and you should look forward to seeing more reports from that coming forward. You can go to the next slide, unless someone has a question. Okay. Moving on. So this is another area where Salt Lake City is really excelling, and I'm excited to tell you about this. This is actually both of my supervisors, Lieutenant Kreider and Captain Scott. They're a logistics section. They are working on a fix to help us capture data. This program is currently being tested, but with it, and you'll see it in the next couple slides, it makes it really easy for the officer on scene to capture whether or not they've used their body-worn camera, and to meet the requirements for reporting when it comes to muting, interruptions, or failures to record. This, by the way, is being requested from outside agencies, other agencies that use Versaterm. They are actively trying to get this from us, and this was homegrown in Salt Lake City, so we should be very proud of it. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a snapshot of the CAD, the computer aided dispatching system. This is how our officers get their calls and their information. If you look over here where the arrow is, there's a little button now icon that says BWC. The officer, whether they're attached to a call or not, can click on that and can document the use or the non-use of the body-worn camera. Next slide. And what that will effectively do when they click on this and they input this information is it will timestamp on the officer's status rather than necessarily a call, unless the officer's on a call, their use. So we have three options. We're trying to keep this very simple. You've got a green button. If you click on that, that is indicating that you used your camera as required by policy from start to finish and everything functioned as we anticipate. That's the overwhelming case with most of the recordings we're keeping. So most people are going to click green. When they click green, they're completed. If, however, you muted or you had a failure to activation, you're going to click one of the other two boxes. And next slide, please. If you click either the yellow or the red box, then you'll be prompted with one of these message boxes. And this one in particular, if you can read the caption, talks about, was the video muted? Excuse me, the reason for muted or not activation. When you do that, the officer cannot go past this screen without inputting that remarks, and that will meet the requirements for statutory reasons in both the state level and also the city the city ordinance, excuse me, because they will have to document specifically why before they can advance and clear and go to the next call. Any questions on that portion? Fantastic. I'll turn it over to the chief then. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sergeant. And what is so nice about that is before, the only way we could really document or we could actually look to see where the compliance might be is in the text portion of the report. The officer would actually write in there that they turned their camera on or it was muted. And it was almost a needle in a haystack type of search to find that, to see where the compliance might be. And so like Mason talked about, this is something that was led out and was developed by Salt Lake City. And now will probably be not only a national program, but probably international. So along with these developments and the things that we're doing internally, we're also looking to create a data dashboard where we can put all this information up on our audits that would be available to review by the public. In the Matrix audit, they've done this several times with a lot of different agencies, and they said that our compliance rate is one of the highest they've seen at 92% of the time. So with that being said, I know, I mean, and I've been out with the officers on the calls to see how these work. It's hard when you're out there making split-second decisions to turn those cameras on, to activate that camera when you should. And I want you to know that the women and men of the Salt Lake City Police Department are doing a really good job. And we're doing the best job we can to review our weak spots, blind spots, and anything that would help us be more compliant, and then show this information to the public we serve. So with that, is there any questions?
I don't
No?
see any,
All right.
Chief.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I ask council staff to go back in the presentation to the slide with the child COVID data
Of course,
for me? Thank you.
yes. I think it's Taylor. Can you give us a hand with that, Taylor?
Thanks, Taylor. My biggest concern right now is with the health of our unvaccinated school kids who are about to start classes in Salt Lake School District a week from today on the 24th without anything in place to protect them from the pandemic. This is a part of our population that really doesn't have any choice but to remain unvaccinated, especially the K through 6, and they have to be indoors in a group of other unvaccinated people for an extended period of time. And that's unique. That's very different from where we were at as a community last year. And it makes them especially vulnerable to contracting the virus and the more contagious Delta variant and spreading it to other people in their families and the community at large. we're seeing right now in real time the COVID disasters that are happening in school districts that are already in session across the country. In Florida's largest district, which is Hillsborough County Public Schools, they have 5,599 students and 316 staff that are either in isolation because of a positive test or in quarantine after coming into close contact with someone who had tested positive. That school board is set to hold an emergency meeting this week to consider a mask mandate. Oklahoma City Public Schools announced a mask requirement following a dramatic increase in the number of new COVID-19 cases in the district in the first week of school. And schools opened in the Atlanta metro area on August 2nd. Just 2 weeks later, the number of COVID cases among students and faculty is almost 4,000. Pickens County, which is the largest South Carolina school district, is back to virtual lessons only after 9 days of in-class learning and an increase in cases of hundreds of students quarantined. You know, when kids are quarantined, it means that parents also have a hard time getting to work and keeping our economy going. It's critically important to me, actually, that our locally elected school board play a role in any decision that I may make related to orders related to the district. And I've asked the school board to make an official recommendation on a requirement for masks in schools. But their next regularly scheduled meeting isn't until September 3rd. School starts August 24th. It would have been much more impactful and would have prevented far more illness for the county council to have supported Dr. Dunn's mask order for schools countywide. Pending our school board support, though, I would be prepared to act in my capacity to put that order in place for our school district. Our city attorney's office has conducted a detailed and thorough analysis of my options and abilities, and they've determined that it is within my legal capacity as mayor to declare a local emergency and issue orders related to that emergency to protect public health and safety. And I'm fully confident in our city attorney's findings. On July 1st, the provisions of HB 294 that we know as the endgame law were repealed. That was written into the legislation. And this included the repeal of the automatic termination of local emergencies related to COVID-19. Our city attorneys further determined that while the laws enacted in the 2021 special sessions do specifically limit the emergency authority of a local health department and the governor with respect to mask orders, those limitations do not extend to mayors. So this authority and ability is not unique to Salt Lake City. I just wanted to give the council an update on where we are at on the administrative side in terms of school starting next week and the increase in cases that we're seeing.
Mayor Mendenhall,
Mm-hmm.
seeing that Council Chair Fowler is not here and I'm currently the interim chair today, I'd formally request that the Salt Lake City School District hold an emergency meeting prior to September 3rd to make up that decision so that these kids know exactly what they're going to be confronted with for the rest of their school year or during this spike, this uptick in COVID transmission rates.
Council member, I'll share with you that I've been in communication with the school district and leadership of the school board. There are individuals on the school board who are supportive of a mask order, but they not having the opportunity to come together and have that public discussion until September 3rd, really feel that it's critical that they be able to do that. So that would be a way for them to do so potentially before school starts. And I think it's obvious, but it's important to everyone that teachers be able to and have the supplies that they need to manage their classrooms and their students safely. And if we were to be able to get that support from the school district before school starts, I think it would be best for everyone.
Yeah, whatever, I think as a council, I think we're all in support of them having some sort of emergency meeting prior to that date that they're looking to meet on September 3rd. So whatever you need from us, if it helps, we'll be willing to back you on that. So.
Well, thanks. That's really the purview, as you know, as chair at the moment of the chair of the school board, but we will share that communication with them.
Thank you.
Anything else from council? Thank you for giving us this time.
Council members, any questions? Okay. I think that's it for your presentation on updates, correct, Mayor?
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. And sorry, council members, filling in for Council Chair Fowler, I failed to mention that the City Council Chair has determined to help reduce the transmission of COVID-19 to resume virtual public meetings only. The return to online meetings is based on the increase in cases and updated mask requirements. So I just wanted to make that public so everybody knows why we're continuing to be virtual. It's because of that uptick. So we are going to move on to item number 3, which is our ordinance for the 2020 Salt Lake City Street Lighting Master Plan. And I know that we've got policy analyst Sam Owen, who is going to be presenting this to us to give us a quick background and update of where we are and make sure that we are good to go. So Sam, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Mr. Chair, we're actually going to go straight to Laura. Sam is in an educational program right now and can't join. So,
well, of course,
sorry about that.
It's my bad. Sorry about that. All right, Laura Briefer.
Hello, and I'm actually going to turn it over to our Deputy Director, Jesse Stewart, to kind of walk through where we are and give a little update post-Planning Commission.
Well, Laura, before you turn it over, I have a question since this is probably my last little briefing that we're going to have with this in regards to public utilities, but Jeff Niermeyer always used to say that his neck started to hurt because he was always looking down as the public utilities director at sewer and water mains. How's your neck doing?
It's pretty well balanced right now, actually. Looking up and down at streetlights and sewer and water mains.
That's right. I just wanted to point that out. That was always a funny joke that he did. So,
thank you. Jesse, are you on?
Yeah, I'm on.
Okay.
Thanks, Laura.
Hi, Jesse.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and good afternoon. Thanks for having us back. This might be one of the last presentations on this as we go forward. We'll see where it goes from today. I want to let everybody know who's on the line with us right now. So Laura's already been on with you. We've also got Dave Pearson, our street lighting manager. And then from our crack team of experts on the consulting side, we've got Jesse Allen and Annika Egan from GSBS Architects. We've got Dane Sanders from Clanton & Associates, and I believe Dr. Travis Longcore from UCLA is also on. Since we've given a couple different briefings on this to you all, and we gave one to the Planning Commission recently, we were back, I think we were last with you in March, and we went to the Planning Commission in April. We gave pretty detailed presentations there. I'm going to do a pretty high-level overview, hit some of the highlights, and then turn it over to Dane Sanders from Clanton & Associates to talk about some of the color temperature and the warmness of the light, which was something the Planning Commission wanted us to look at a little bit more. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we last were there in April of this year, and the Planning Commission made a positive recommendation for adoption, but they did want us to look at the warmness of the light and the Kelvin temperatures. That's kind of the whiteness of the light to the kind of the more amber color of light as we go forward. So I'm going to go through a little bit of how we got to where we are, and then I'll turn it over to Dane. But before we go forward, something came in yesterday from the International Dark Sky Association. And this is actually a letter addressed to the council. I'm not sure if you all had a chance to look at that yet, but we got a really favorable endorsement from the IDE, or IDA, the International Dark Sky Association, really commending us for our plan. I think we've always thought it was a really good plan, but to get that from the IDA really shows that we are on the forefront of really leading the industry for municipalities and for large municipalities with lighting. So next slide. So real quick, I'm going to do a quick overview. As you know, we did a fairly robust engagement process. We had an advisory group made up of citizens from each one of the districts that council staff and council recommended. We also had a technical committee made up of various departments within the city, whether it's emergency management, fire, police, open space and public lands, transportation, et cetera. And then we also had a stakeholder group that was made up of education. Tracy Avier, I believe, was on there, the University of Utah, Downtown Alliance, bicycling, and environmental groups. So we went through that, and with that process, if we can go to the next slide. We came up with some of our guideposts, and these guideposts really led the discussion as we were looking at different options for our street lighting program. And they were safety, character, responsibility, and equity. Again, trying to incorporate those into all the decisions we made as we put forth our street lighting master plan. So again, I'm not going to go through any real details on that because we've gone through that before. But I do want to go back to what the Planning Commission wanted us to look at, and that was the color temperature, really the warmness of the light. And so the next slide, I'll let Dane Sanders take that discussion, and he can kind of walk you through some of the decisions we made and really what color temperature means for the environment and for users of our streets and sidewalks. Dane, if you're there, take it over.
Yeah, my name is Dane Sanders with Plant and Associates, and we were the consultant for GSBS who had put together this lighting master plan. We really wanted to make this master plan something that is dynamic and forward-thinking, and really adapts to the lighting that is appropriate according to the adjacent land uses and zoning within the city. Really thinking more about not just about the people and the safety, but also about the environment, about dark skies, and also the impact of light on wildlife. And that's why we brought in Travis Longcore, who is one of the world's experts in how light affects all species of wildlife. So the plan utilizes all different color temperatures depending on the adjacent land use. And it also, the plan, the way it's currently set is we're setting sort of the maximum color temperature, providing an opportunity to actually reduce that color temperature based on community feedback. And we are looking at implementing a pilot study that will engage the community to actually go and take surveys to look at these different color temperatures and understand how people respond to them, because there's many. We wanted to make sure we were covering all the different guideposts. That for safety purposes, the somewhat higher color temperatures with 3,000 Kelvin, which you see on the bottom right, is a little bit more crisp, a little bit more clear to some in visibility, and our eyes are a little bit more sensitive to that color of light at night. So is our circadian rhythms. So light affects our health, and the blue light particularly is the spectrum at which suppresses melatonin. And this is one of the issues that was brought up by some citizens, some concerned citizens. And we have incorporated all of this into our master plan. So some of the concerned citizens would like to see, more of the 1800 Kelvin, which I would describe as amber, and doesn't really render colors necessarily as well as higher color temperatures such as 3000 Kelvin. So 2200 Kelvin is still warm. I would almost call it like an orange kind of color that is very similar to the previous technology of high pressure sodium, which was across your city before LED was implemented. 2700 is very common. Both 2700 and 3000 are very common in your homes, and higher color temperatures of 3500, 4000 Kelvin, 5000 Kelvin are typical for like medical facilities, interior lighting, things like that. I would say, but we're not proposing any of those color temperatures in this master plan. In fact, the maximum of 3000 Kelvin is limited to commercial areas and multifamily residential. 2700 Kelvin is what is proposed as the maximum allowable in residential areas. And 2200 Kelvin is what's proposed as maximum for the open space and industrial areas, considering especially a lot of the industrial development that's happening in Salt Lake City is within some of those open space and more natural sort of undeveloped areas. Now, we prepared a memo that describes in detail a lot of these different issues and how they relate, how these different color temperatures relate to, health and well-being, to wildlife, to just the aesthetic appearance and how people respond to those things. And as well as we got a lot of input from the police and had very specific opinions about, the color rendition of the lights and color sort of identification, and that being a concern, and that really a lot of these things can be very complicated to talk about because there's so many different issues that it relates to. And that's why we feel that having a pilot study where we can actually gather data from the citizens with these different color temperatures in place would be the best way forward to actually determine the final color temperatures for residential areas, commercial areas, and the open space and industrial areas. And there may be many questions. I'm sort of limited in the time we have here. So I guess if you go to the next slide, this pilot study, which would be the next step, there's actually a project that is underway right now under design on 200 South, the 200 South improvements, which we're looking at installing these 4 different color temperatures on different blocks along 200 South. And there's the great thing about this area is that it spans through commercial and has these downtown, what are called the cactus pole lights, the decorative lights within downtown. And it also goes through some more, commercial and then residential areas. It passes by one of the schools, and we get to sort of test out this master plan in a small area and use that as to gather more feedback and more data to make these final decisions. The color temperatures that we've provided and as maximum do follow the International Dark Sky Association recommendations and the American Medical Association recommendations. I guess one other thing that we want to test is not only color temperature, but then also ability to dim and reduce the light levels at different times of night and still maintain good visibility. So that's another thing that would be tested in that pilot study. And I just want to make sure that we get to have an opportunity here to answer your questions. If anybody had a chance to read through the memo, if there are detailed questions, either I or Dr. Travis Longcore are here to answer those.
Mr. Chair or Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Dugan.
Dane, and just a quick question. Is the pilot study been funded, and when are you going to start it, and how long it's going to take?
It is proposed. It is, I guess there's some of the, Dave Pearson, the streetlight manager, has said that he has already been able to procure some of the lights themselves. The full study is not yet funded. We're preparing a scope to do so. I think as far as time frame, I would say we could potentially be ready in three months, depending on lead time of all the lights we're trying to get.
So
and then to actually do the study might take a little bit longer.
I might jump in on that too. I think one thing we're looking at is that 200 South project is a broader city project for that whole street corridor. So we're going to design a pilot study in portions of that as we go forward. So the question on funding is still being worked out. We have some funds to get it started, but we'll wait and see what the scope is and determine how far we can get on it in the next little short while.
And was there any discussion about funding at pilot studies in different parts of the city besides the 200 South? Or is it just all?
we've looked at various options. One reason it's looks good in this area is because it is a broader project that's doing a lot of work, and they need to have streetlights incorporated into that. So we do it there, and that would be a test spot for other communities to come in. And then with the way the plan is written, there is flexibility for there is flexibility built into the plan so that we don't have to have a one size fit all for every community. But it would be something we go up into any of the districts and kind of incorporate what we're learning from the pilot study in those areas.
Great, because I think this is a wonderful project and wonderful attachments and lesson on lighting and health. I just want to make sure that the residents understand what we're looking at, because this is in-depth and wonderful program. So I really appreciate all the work.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wharton.
Thank you. So when we say the plan is, or that the recommendations follow the dark skies recommendations and they follow the American Medical Association recommendations, does it require us to follow those, or does it just say that we will endeavor to follow them, or what exactly, how binding is it?
Both the International Dark Sky Association and American Medical Association have set a maximum recommended color temperature of 3000 Kelvin.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, we have mandated it, and actually we've gone further than that in other areas. So we've gone lower color temperature in residential, single family residential, and in these open space and industrial areas.
Okay, great. And then can you talk a little bit about, Jesse, can you talk a little bit about how the advisory group of residents that you had was engaged in this process? Because I'd heard some feedback from some residents from District 3 that they didn't feel like there was enough input. So can you speak to that and just talk a little bit about what the level of input was from residents?
Yeah, and I can let Dane and Dave speak in on this too. So again, we went back, if you want to, can we go back a couple slides to the public engagement slide? It's 2 or 3 back. So again, we had the various.
I'm not seeing, oh, there it is. Gotcha.
So we had the advisory committee. We met multiple times on this. The advisory committee helped draft our guideposts and helped us craft the basis for where we were going and the kind of the ethic of the plan itself. And those are multiple meetings. I know we engaged with them quite often. I'd have to go back and look through the actual report to find out how many times we did that, or Dane or Dave know that off the top of their head. But again, that was a representative from each of the council districts. We did initially a tour with them, and then with council staff and mayor staff to go out to various locations across the city to get a baseline conditions of what the city looked like. And then that information helped guide where we wanted to go following our guideposts as we went forward. We also engaged with the technical committee, like I said, and then also had the stakeholder group that's not on this slide, but that was with the bicycle community, environmental groups, places like the University of Utah. So I feel we did engage fairly robustly with the advisory committee. And I'm not sure if other questions came from folks who weren't on that committee. Councilmember, you may have to expand on that for us.
I am not sure. No, I think it was people that were on the committee, but like, how does it compare to like other similar projects that we've done and where we've had a resident advisory board give that input?
I think sorry, was that?
Speak a little bit to that, Jesse.
Okay, that's great.
Like a good example is when we develop our new rate studies, we have a very similar process with a residential advisory committee and technical committees made up of other stakeholders, and then a public process to receive comments. So I think comparing this to other processes is it's very similar, and I think a lot more work went into this back in this started in 2018 than we had previously done on our processes. In fact, this one probably elevated the rest of our projects in terms of the level of stakeholder involvement that we now include.
Okay. And then, sorry, I just have one final question, which is that, like, I still hear a lot from residents in certain areas, on 12th Avenue, where it is steep, and that there are some new lights there that are really bright, that are looking to this plan and hoping that this will prevent that from happening going forward. And then, of course, they also are hoping that even though those lights have already been redone, that those lights can be reevaluated. Does this plan account for that? Like, what can I go back and tell those residents to, so that they know that their experience has helped this process and that it's going to be remedied?
So I think
I'll take that one if you like. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Dane.
Yeah, what we've tried to build into this plan is an ongoing engagement process, exactly for that reason. And not only engagement, but also, a built-in adaptability for the lighting, so that when something, first of all, you get the community together in these pilot studies to sort of help pick some of that, the color temperature and what's going on there. Then provide dimming capabilities that can actually be tuned on site, as well as having shielding options that can limit light trespass and focus the light where it's intended to be and not onto residential areas. Topography is difficult to deal with, where you stand there and you're looking up into the light. It's easier when you're looking down at the lights and they all kind of disappear. But the dimmability is something that's really critical that we can adapt and provide. We think that the IES, the Illuminating Engineering Society, and the sort of standard lighting criteria that we typically follow is too high. But we can't really vary from that very far without creating some liability issues, without actually engaging the citizens and doing something active like this, where people say, yeah, I can see that you can dim that far and I'm fine with it. I can still see. And that's why that dimmability and eventually a citywide control system is intended. That will take a bit longer, but sort of the individual dimming of lights based on resident feedback is something that we would like to, that is built into this.
Can I add something to that as well, Dane? So this plan also highlights a prioritization measure for neighborhoods as well, where neighborhoods who are currently underserved have #1 priority in their lighting. And then after that, it comes to priority areas, transit stops, schools, kind of these areas of high volume crossings. And then from that, neighborhood groups can come forward and request lighting and upgrades to lighting. So it just falls in that level of prioritization. However, there is a mechanism that the plan does outline that neighborhoods can use through their community councils or whatever it may be to request lighting changes.
So I've got a follow-up question to that question. Would a community then come through the CIP process and do that, and then just pass that cost through the general fund, or how would that be done? It's one of our policy questions that I was going to ask, because I don't know if Lehua Weaver's on, but back in the day we used to have these special not assessment areas, but lighting districts that never were able to pay for themselves, and we got rid of those because they weren't funding themselves. Isn't that right, Jesse? And then we were able to just put it all into the general fund and absorb those costs. But on the west side, Rose Park has great lighting, and thankful to former council member Carlton Christensen, who was able to get that lighting district put together for us. But Jordan Meadows, West Point, I know Fair Park and Poplar Grove, all of those are severely underserved areas that need lighting areas. So walk me through the process with that.
So I think one thing we'll do is, and there are still enhanced lighting areas. Some of those are still enhanced lighting areas, and there are different fee structure than other areas in the city. But as we move forward, we're going to have priorities as we go, and some of those would be the high priority areas of high conflict areas, high pedestrian vehicle interaction areas, schools, things like that. So we're going to have to come up with an actual, or not actual, but have to come up with a more detailed implementation plan once we get going and as we prioritize things and move forward. We will be taking public feedback and putting that into the whole metric for what the fund can, what the utility can fund. And so it won't necessarily be coming out of the general fund, but it would be coming out of the street lighting budget as we go forward. So that'll be something, as we've been doing the changeovers from high pressure sodiums to LEDs, we're going to now target that more towards what the area calls for as we move forward. If it's a residential area, it might be 2700. If it's going to be in an open space area, it might be 2200 Kelvin, or it might be 3000 if it's going to be in more of a commercial area. So those are going to be things as we go forward. We want to get that feedback from the city and from the residents and find out what their needs are as we go forward. And then we can take the plan as it's developed and target that to individual areas.
So maybe I didn't pose my question correct, Jesse, and you know a lot about this more than I do, but most of the time if a community wanted to improve their lighting areas, for example, add lighting, they'd go through the CIP process, right? So how will this differ from that in the future?
Again, I think if they're going to go, sorry, who was that?
That was me. Go ahead, Jesse.
Oh, go ahead, Laura, you can.
No, you got it.
I was going to say, we'll still be following a lot of that as we go forward, but we'll have to determine if they're going to go, if they want to do something above and beyond what our base lighting would be. And so our base lighting would be how often, intersection poles, how often we have it mid-block, things like that. And then if it wants to be something above and beyond that, it might have to go into a different process. And Laura, maybe that's what you were going to talk about.
Yeah, I think there's still the question that we need to coordinate on citywide regarding what used to be the special assessment area process for the capital improvement for lighting that's above and beyond what the city's plan calls for, those special assessment areas were absorbed into public utilities as enhanced lighting areas, as Jesse mentioned. They have a different rate because the cost of service of those are higher. And so one of the recommendations in the plan actually is to come up with that exact process. We still need to work through that citywide to see what would be the best process for those types of requests. And the plan still also has the private lighting program involved too. Is that what you're getting at? Okay.
That helps steer me clear. So yeah. I appreciate that, both of you. Okay. That helps greatly.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have one other question, if nobody else does. What about, why aren't we using, I know some other cities have used a 2700 minimum, why aren't we using that? I know you mentioned that there are potential liability issues, but how do other cities that use the 2700 minimum, how do they justify that?
I wouldn't say there's, the liability issues are not really around the color temperature. That was more about around light level.
Oh, okay.
The light level. And so there's a very small difference between 3000 Kelvin and 2700 Kelvin. Both for, there's a subtle aesthetic difference. There's a minor difference in the effects on, human health and things like that. Where you start to, if you are trying to just, affect that question about how light affects health, taking out the blue, every white LED has a blue chip in it. And there's phosphor over the top of that makes it broadens the spectrum to white light. The lower color temperatures like 2200 and 1800 actually have an amber chip and then a phosphor over that to change it. So it's basically getting rid of the blue. And by doing so, you're changing the color perception as well of how much you can, what colors you can see, and things like that. But the part of the question about this, the light and health, is whether street lighting is actually at a level that suppresses melatonin. And this, even the scientists and the researchers that are working on this can't quite, there's not an agreement amongst the community yet. So, you know, if you decide to go to 2700, you're not making a much of a difference in the whole thing. But if you go and limit to the lighting across the entire city to 2200 Kelvin, you're basically going to go back to the high pressure sodium kind of color that you had before LED, which if you don't engage the community, you're probably going to get kickback from a lot of other parts of the community as well. So this topic has opinions on both sides, and there's you know, that's why this community engagement and this pilot study is intended to gather data to really see what that is across the board. And if 2700 is right, why not make that if 2700 is what people like, if 2200 is what people like, that's what they should go with, right? This plan offers that flexibility.
So this doesn't lock us in at 3,000. We could potentially, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. These are what we propose are maximums in each of those areas, not minimums.
Yeah, could I add just one thing here? This is Travis Longcore, part of the consulting team on the wildlife and human health issues. The city of Davis, California, chose to, after having installed higher color temperature lights, went back, worked with the community, and decided that they would go with 2700 Kelvin. I am not positive that that included all their commercial zones, but it certainly was for their residential zones. We, for single family residential here, have recommended 2700 Kelvin to start with. Could be lower. These are maximums, not minimums. And by what that means is you could have light that has less blue in it, but not more, right? That's what the setting a maximum means. And there is the capacity in here for when you get to a point in a commercial zone where the maximum number is 3000, you could have people have a look and say, you know what, we really prefer 2700 Kelvin and we want it everywhere. We don't need 3000 Kelvin anywhere. But that is only going to come after a process, and only for those certain areas where the sort of higher color rendering is probably a greater priority, which is the commercial areas with commercial in them. So all that's saying is cities can go with 2700 Kelvin. I don't know a city at this point for an LED transition that's gone lower than that for their maximum. But certainly there are cities that do it as a matter of practice. It can be done and you can meet all the standards, but it's like Hawaii next to observatories, or a city on the coast of Florida where they've got an endangered species issue where they have to go with basically an amber light. And Salt Lake could decide that. The plan would allow for that, but only with input and buy-in.
And Councilmember Wharton, I think to address your question about downtown and the 3000 versus the 2700, remember that this plan is only for streetlights, and you have all the commercial development that would have their own color temperature as part of their exterior or interior lighting that is going to impact the overall look and feel of downtown in terms of color temperature. And we're only talking about the occasional cactus pole that would then be, you know, reduced in color temperature should the community decide to do so.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm comforted by the fact that, you know, we still have some flexibility, and because I do have more questions about it, but I don't want to take up all of the time here. But I appreciate the answers, and I'll just keep following up on this. So thank you.
And Councilmember Warden, one thing I wanted to follow up on, You did mention 12th Avenue, and if that helped us inform this decision, our street lighting master plan. We're waiting for implementation of this, and then we'll work with that community on those. So they definitely did help inform where we want to go. They are on one of those areas that's kind of up on the border of the wildlands, and we will eventually, those lights will be reduced to a lower color temperature.
Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm here. Sorry I was late, but I did catch the majority of this conversation, which was interesting. It's good to see everyone. Council members, are there any final questions on this particular matter before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, well, thank you to Public Utilities and their partners for being here today and giving us this update. It was very helpful, actually. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, council members, it's good to see everyone. I apologize for being late, but I was in a National League of Cities meeting, and we have 2 more meetings tomorrow and Thursday. They're quite interesting. We're doing a virtual site visit with Honolulu. So yes, we're not in person. I wish I was. But if you guys have a chance to log in to those meetings, either Wednesday or Thursday, it was a very interesting discussion today on tourism and economic development as it relates to Honolulu and just kind of collaborating with some of our colleagues throughout the country. So I apologize for being late. That was why it was, and thanks Vice Chair James Rogers for taking over. With that, I will turn to agenda item number 4, which is our capital improvement program projects follow-up. And I believe at the table we will have Ben Ludke and Callie is here. I just saw her pop on. And so I'll start with Ben there you are. Had to go around my computer looking for tiles. To start out our conversation. Also, P.S. by the way, this is rad. So cool. It's such a great, it just nice work is what I'm trying to say. So Ben, I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson Fowler. And I have to acknowledge that the ARPA infographic is so rad because of the great work Amanda and Amber in our office did. I could not have done this without them.
Thanks, Amanda and Amber.
So this is our 4th briefing on CIP, and your 2nd public hearing is scheduled for tonight. The council is scheduled to have another briefing on CIP next Tuesday, and then vote on the project-specific funding also next Tuesday. So balancing the CIP budget is needed for that vote in a week. We have Director Thomas with us, who is available to review the administration's responses to your policy questions about CIP, if time allows. Otherwise, we can do it next Tuesday. At the last briefing, the council members identified 6 projects for potential funding. And these are listed on the 1st and 2nd page of the staff report. I'll list them quickly right now. Number 3, the Odyssey House Annex building renovation. Number 54, the Wasatch D. Glen tennis court construction. Number 57, Harrison Avenue and 700 East Community Garden. Number 59, the Wingate Walkway. 68, Capitol Hill traffic calming. And number 72, Sugar House safe side streets. Now the total cost of those 6 projects to get them to be fully funded is almost $2.2 million. Assuming that ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, dollars are used to fully fund number 3, the Odyssey House application, which would free up $300,000 from the general fund. With that assumption, this means your available funding for those 6 projects, you're $431,000 short. Now, there's also a question if the council wanted to increase the percent for art and the cost overrun account. Since you added general fund dollars to CIP, the question is, do you want a portion of those added general fund dollars to go to the percent for art and the cost overrun account to maintain that level of funding? If the answer was yes, that would be an additional $35,000.
Ben, I have a
Yes.
question. So we increased the percent for art to 1.5%, correct? Last year?
You did.
So are you saying that we need to add more money to that to keep it at the 1.5% for this budget, for this CIP?
Correct.
Okay, and how much would that be?
The percent for art would be just over $15,000.
Okay.
Now, I see most of you have the ARPA infographic, and you should also have an updated copy of the funding log. If anyone doesn't have it, let staff know. The funding log updates are ARPA eligibility is now shown in red font on the far left side in the title column. And there are also updates to the available funding amounts. The general fund increased and the Class C decreased. And those are the amounts in green in the upper right-hand corner on each page. Yes, thank you, Taylor. There were also some updates to project descriptions, most of which we talked about at the July briefings, but we wanted to memorialize those in the funding log, since the log is attached to the resolution that you'll be voting on next Tuesday. Taylor, can you switch back to the ARPA graphic and I'll walk through it? And if you'd scroll up just a little bit, right at the top of the graphic in red, we have 2 important pieces of information: that the deadline to spend these one-time federal dollars is December of 2024. So there's time, but there is a deadline to keep in mind. When you go down to the financial overview, that green bar, the 85 million, that is the confirmed amount from the US Treasury Department that Salt Lake City is receiving from ARPA for the relief and recovery funds. There are other ARPA funds that are specific to uses such as the airport or HUD grants, but this 85 million is the more flexible funds which we've been getting changing, evolving guidance from the Treasury on. The bar below the green one is divided into sections. The red section is the $22 million that was budgeted, and we're calling it funds spent because they have been approved as part of the fiscal year 22 annual budget. Next to that is a little yellow bar. That is the $1.5 million you placed into a holding account as part of the annual budget. There were 10 projects and programs that were proposed, which were determined to not be eligible for ARPA. Now, we've received updated guidance from the Treasury since then, and the council's intent was to revisit the holding account at a later date to see if some of those proposals could be tailored to be eligible for ARPA, or some of them just won't be eligible, but that's a future conversation. The remainder of the second bar is that blue, the $61 million. Now, those are the funds that have not been budgeted. Of that 61 million, you'll see some of it is white slashes through the blue bar. And that's $36 million, which is estimated to be needed next fiscal year. The 36 million was calculated by taking the 22 million, the red bar, most of which is ongoing expenses, so people and programs. So the 22 million, and then doubling the revenue replacement option, and then adding in a slight cost escalator to recognize costs typically go up year after year. So we rounded that to 36 million. That 36 million could and likely will change. The guidance from the Treasury could change again, and finance is still calculating some of the revenue replacement options based on Treasury guidance. So 36 million is a good guess right now. The remainder of that blue bar is 25 million, which is not expected to be needed next fiscal year and doesn't have a proposal to use it right now. If you'd scroll down a little, Taylor, the 4 columns, these are just some of the ideas that we've heard from council members that you've asked about. And let me say, this is not comprehensive. There are many more uses that are eligible for ARPA. We have also heard council members ask about public transit, and it does appear that some public transit could be funded with ARPA in qualified census tracks. So those frequent bus routes that Funding Our Future is covering, that is a potential option. We've also heard from you about digital equity, which could be eligible in some circumstances, as well as increasing the supply of affordable housing. But the 4 that we have on the infographic, number 1, probably the biggest, is the funding needs next fiscal year, that $36 million. The second item is listed as a general fund balance reimbursement. You can think of this as swapping the funding source for the 2 items that are listed below it. At the start of the pandemic, the city provided $1 million for small business loans. You could swap the funding source of that. There was also the $2 million to create low-income senior and veteran housing. This was the Airport Inn. And then today, we're talking about the CIP program. There appears to be over $6 million in projects that are eligible for ARPA. Odyssey House being the one that we talked about last month, it's fully eligible. And then the 4th is the sales tax bond. There are 2 projects in the proposed bond that are partially, potentially fully eligible, but we would need additional details to make sure that the location of the improvements for those 2 projects are in qualified census tracts. And if you're wondering where those tracts are, it's attachment 13 to the staff report. There's a map showing the tracts. And I also want to point out on the flip side of the infographic, we've itemized all of the items that represent the funds spent, the 22 million, as well as the items in the $1.5 million holding account, and then the CIP projects and the bond projects. And at the bottom of this first page, we thought it might be helpful to list a few policy questions for you to think about, such as how much should be reserved for next fiscal year? Should the city use some ARPA money to preserve bond capacity for future opportunities or to preserve fund balance? And then we wanted to show you a quick pie chart showing where the funds have gone. And the biggest portion of that was revenue replacement, which goes to the whole general fund. So we thought that should be called out as its own category. So hopefully this is good context as you think about ARPA and as you deliberate how to use it.
Thank you, Ben. Will you not share the screen anymore for a minute? Please. Thank you. My understanding is that the Madam Mayor would like to say something. Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Council, I know that today this is sort of a bookend to your CIP discussion. And there is a lot for us to talk about ARPA that will be coming up in a future council work session. But I wanted to share with you that the way I've approached the proposal that is coming to the council and a memo that you've already received is around instead of taking it as a CIP type approach that literally might look at a various and sundry dozens of projects that could happen across the city and are all great projects and legitimate, that we look through these ARPA dollars as an opportunity for us to make strategic and pointed investments in our communities who have lacked such catalytic investment in the city's history. And I've always been inspired by the CCC work through the Great Depression. There's even parts of our city's beloved infrastructure, like the wall at the cemetery and some paintings that hang in our own building, parts of our public infrastructure that were created through that money during the Great Depression and empowering the local artists and talent in the city to be employed and to make a lasting impact that benefited the city. It's not the same thing, but I think similarly about this ARPA opportunity. And we are in a great position as a city based on the work that's led up to this moment in time, the conversations that you've been leading as the city council, and the work that our departments have been doing in the last year in particular to figure out how could we best and most poignantly invest in our community. So instead of a CIP type many listed scattered approach, what we'll be bringing to you and what I encourage you to see the ARPA money as is this great catalytic opportunity in a focused way. So I know we're not going to dive into those details in this meeting, but I wanted to have the opportunity to share that vision with you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So, council members, as been pointed out in the staff report, the last time that we all met and talked, we we talked about the 6 things that were priorities for each of the council members. And I am curious as to where people are still with these 6 priorities that are not funded. That, I mean, that's where we're sort of at right now, right? Is these priorities that are not funded that I think we're trying to figure out, is there a way to fund them? And hopefully not take too much from the things that have already been recommended. Because as we went through throughout the last 2 briefing sessions, I didn't really see many concerns for what had been recommended as funding. What I saw was simply concerns for some priorities that had not been recommended for funding. So I suggested to those that had the priorities or that had some ideas of what they wanted funded to hopefully come back with, here's where I would propose to take money to give to this priority that's not funded. And I'm curious as to where council members sit with those priorities at this time. I think that might be the best approach to look at this so that we can get to a balanced CIP budget. So I'll start with any council member that had a priority and maybe has an idea now. I see Dan's hand up. So Dan, I will turn it to you first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as number 54, which was the one project that I'm looking to get funded, the original request was for 500,000. I've gone back to the foundation. They've got a contract or a bid to reduce that to 400,000. So they would be they could use 400,000. They don't need to use the full 500,000 for their projects, which again is for residents across the whole city. And I think there is another project that could also, so that would take that over from 430 something down to 330. And I think there was another possibility of other projects that possibly be being reduced. And then we can take the ARPA funding and swap these for those, and we'd end up with a zero balance. These for those. That's really a technical term. Going back to Ben's clear explanation. So I have no issues with that going from 500,000 to 400,000, and I think that was a good compromise by that request.
With that $100,000 reduction, the funding gap would be just over $331,000.
That's assuming that we take that we free up the full $300,000 for the Odyssey project.
Correct.
And assume that it's going to be used by ARPA funding.
Correct.
The ARPA funding would, yes, the Odyssey would be funded at 500,000, 300,000 would go to that 300, yes.
And any use of the ARPA dollars for CIP, we would need to follow up in a budget amendment to formally change the budget. So there would be a slight delay until the next budget amendment is available. But you're correct, Chairperson Fowler. The $331,000 gap assumes using ARPA for Odyssey House.
I want to go back to what the mayor said, and something that has been on my mind is this idea that I don't know that I want to sort of nickel and dime away the ARPA funding, and that I think we do have an opportunity to use it for some catalytic projects. I keep saying that the CARES money to me was money that we threw out, those little lifesavers to people, little O-rings, kind of throwing those out to people where they were drowning off the Titanic. But maybe the ARPA funding gives us an opportunity to actually build the lifeboat that's big enough for everyone. And I kind of going along that catalytic idea. And so I am slightly hesitant to use a lot of the ARPA funding. I don't know that I would be with some of it, but just some ideas. I mean, just some of my thoughts out there, and curious as to what other council members are thinking about that. I also think one of the things we may want to do, and if anybody has a better idea, please let me know, but we may want to take straw polls on people's priorities. I mean, I don't know where people are in supporting another council member's priority on funding or not funding, right? And where we are at the budget. So think about that towards as we try to get to that balanced budget. Just some things I want to throw out there and have a discussion about. So, Dan?
So I would agree on the catalytic side of the house, but I also look at these projects that we have on this list, and I don't think it's nickel and diming. I think these are great projects that have a lot of support from across the city that also can be catalytic in nature. The street calming, that's catalytic in nature because that really sets a good tone. The walkway and wingate sets a good tone. The community garden sets a good tone. The tennis sets a good tone because it's across the things. The Odyssey House, they all set a good tone across the city, and it's a good spread across the city of all these projects that will also be their own little catalytic press across the city in all their own little special ways. So I understand, and I'm hearing the mayor speak, but I'm also seeing these are some projects that came from the community, and they also deemed them as good projects for their area and good projects for the city in a whole. So I'm in favor of them. I'm just looking to see how we can find that $400,000 or $330,000.
James?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I agree with Councilmember Dugan. I'm in favor of that, finding that funding too, to make sure that that happens, takes care of projects across the board, and closes out a lot of, empty beds that have not been made. So I'm all in favor of it.
Other council members?
I'm in support of this too. I think the ARPA fund is for, I think it's like, of course, catalytic, but these projects have been asked by the community. I think they're here to stay for a long time. They're being used, and we need to help replace them, so that we can have them for another 10, 20 years. And so this is a good opportunity to use ARPA funds. I also think that, I'm nervous when we use ARPA funds for general budget stuff, for programs and staffing that we know we're going to run out at some point, and our budget at some point will be the same, and we are going to struggle keeping people or keeping programs. So that's where I'm like, versus improvements will be here for a long time. So
That's a good point, Anna. Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I don't know if this is, I'm remembering back to over a month ago, and I don't know if you had brought this up again, Councilmember Fowler, but it seemed like the project in Sugar House, that the traffic calming, they would be able to go forward if there were about 300,000 there, or they could at least get started. So if Councilmember, the tennis construction is down 100,000, and if we were to put 300,000 there, wouldn't that fill our funding gap for these projects?
If project number 72 was reduced to 300,000, that would be a $200,000 reduction. So it would help, but it wouldn't fully close the funding gap.
Okay, I was misremembering the number there.
On that specific project, if it had $168,000, that would balance CIP. If you were to give it 300,000, you would still have a $131,000 funding gap.
Okay, I am worried about chipping away at the ARPA funds, and also about having I mean, just like how Councilmember Valdemoros raised the point that, we don't want to use ARPA for ongoing costs. Like, I wonder if that also applies to CIP, that we've already done an extra amount of fundraising for CIP this year. And do we want to take and use the ARPA dollars to do more CIP this year, knowing that we're not going to be able to deliver on that the same level every year? So I don't know if it's a good idea to overload it this year because we can, or if it's a bad idea to overload it because does it create, an expectation going forward about what we're able to fund each year? I'm not sure the answer to that, but I don't necessarily, I feel like we still need to have a big ARPA discussion, and I feel I feel nervous about taking away from that and taking away the resources available in that discussion, just so that we can resolve our concerns for this discussion. So, especially when we're so close.
Ben, so our budget right now includes the little over 1 million that we added, correct?
Correct.
So, I mean, it's important to me that we also look at the 1.5% for arts. And so that would be 15,000. And I think that the project I'm interested in, number 72, we could fund this study for $50,000 and do that this year and have the applicant come back next year after, I mean, it's going to take at least a year to do a study of any sort, come back after the study is done to look at what that study says, and then we'd probably even have a better idea of what construction costs would look like based on the study. But it kind of increases and gets moving on our traffic calming stuff that, to be quite frank, 2 years ago, we funded 600 East traffic calming, and I don't think anything's been done on that over here in D7. And so it's not like there yet, right? And so it does take a couple of years to get these things done. So I would be okay if we looked at funding 50,000 to number 72 instead of 500,000, and that brings that down quite a bit, right? It brings our gap down. But then adding the 15,000 to the percent for art.
So that does more than reduce the gap. That closes the gap. And you would also have a little bit of a remainder. So $50,000 to number 72 and $15,000 to the percent for art. You would have $103,000 not allocated to a project.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
that $103,000 is assuming still the $300,000 for Odyssey houses coming from ARPA, right?
Yes.
So I would propose in that case, either we take that 100 and whatever out of ARPA and keep it in the general fund so that we have that much more in ARPA, or we give that 100 and something thousand back to number 72, just to make sure that there's a little bit of extra that they could, because traffic calming doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. They could do the study and they can do a few spots, and then they could continue to do more things, because it's not like they're tearing up the whole road and they have to do it all at once. It's like sometimes intersection by intersection. So I would go, if that's what everyone else wants to fund, and that's what I would propose with it, a little bit extra.
I would be
Personally-
okay with that.
Personally, I would like to fund all of these things, but if I had to choose, it sounds like 54 and 72 are the ones that are being sort of discussed, the tennis or the sugar house traffic calming. I would, if it was down to those two, I would probably prefer number 72, just because I think traffic calming as a public safety issue, I know at least my constituents are really concerned about that. So I'm not sure where we're at with all of the decisions, but I think that's probably the one that I would prefer to keep. But if we can do all those, and you, Councilmember Fowler, think that that would be enough for District 7 this year, or enough for that project this year, then I think we go forward that way.
Under the approach Councilmember Mono just laid out, Chairperson Fowler, that would be a total of $168,000 to project number 72. So $50,000 for the study, but then you'd still have $118,000 to do some of those traffic calming improvements.
And that includes the 15,000 over to percent for art.
Correct.
And that includes, so we would be balanced at funding all 6 of these projects in the way that we just discussed.
Correct, assuming ARPA is used to fund the Odyssey house.
Well, I think that's the vote everybody's assuming at this point. Am I wrong?
Madam
There's
Chair.
one other detail I want to make the council aware of. You added recaptured funding from completed projects with Class C funding, the gas tax funding. The only project out of the 6 you identified that's eligible for gas tax funding would be the traffic calming. So we would use the gas tax funding for either number 72 or 68, the 2 traffic calming projects, because those funds must be spent on streets.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Who said that? Dennis, was that you?
That was me. I really like where the discussion's going, how we're figuring this out. I am curious about if we can get any feedback from the administration on capacity. Like you said, that certain projects have taken multiple years already and no chance of them being done right away already. Can we take into account how much capacity the administration has to be able to accomplish any of these projects in the foreseeable future.
I'm happy to turn that question over to the administration, but I think that in some ways we've heard that there's not a ton of capacity. But Lorna just popped on, and I will turn it over to you, Lorna.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything new to add. As you know, you approved the positions within the engineering division, and they are aggressively recruiting for those. We hope to get them onboarded, but with the number of projects, not so much the dollar amount, it's the number of projects, and each one takes quite a bit of time and has complexity to it. It is challenging for engineering to complete them. We do use consultants for almost all projects. I would say that an effort we're engaged in right now is to bring some scheduling and prioritization to projects that are already approved. And that's in collaboration with all the partners who are doing the projects, bringing them forward so that we can stack them, coordinate them, maybe leverage them, and time them out in a reasonable way, and then report those to the public. So to the mayor's point about a catalytic approach, we hope that putting projects together in certain areas will amplify their results. We don't have anything to present to you yet, but that's the approach we're trying to take to manage the workload.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lorna. Council members, do we have any other questions or comments on this?
Should we take a straw poll just to?
If you'd like to propose one, I'd love that.
Dang it. It's going to be really complicated. And so I would like to, in a surprise move, turn the time over to Ben to restate what we have basically agreed on, and that will be my straw poll. And I will change it if there's something I hear that doesn't sound right. Is that okay, Ben?
Of course. I think I can read your mind in this moment.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wharton is proposing a straw poll to fully fund number 3 Odyssey House using ARPA funds, which will be done in the next budget amendment, and using those $300,000 plus the available funding from the general fund and Class C fund to fund the 6 projects the council identified and will be listed in the funding log, with number 72 being partially funded and the rest of the projects being fully funded, and $15,000 for the Percent for Art Fund.
That's right.
Any discussion on that well-articulated straw poll that was reiterated by Ben from Chris's mind?
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
For Ben. So Ben, sorry, those 6 projects, I don't have them fresh in my mind, but I don't remember disagreeing, but can I, is that the, is a garden included on that one, number 57?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
I have another clarifying question. Is it actually 5 projects? Because the 6th was the Odyssey house that is now not in CIP, it's in ARPA.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and then the other amendment, friendly amendment, would be number 54 is at 400,000 instead of 500,000. So that one's also technically partially funded.
Good clarification.
Dan, did you have anything else?
I was just going to repeat what Darren said. So
Does everyone understand the straw poll? Okay, show your feelings. All right, that is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I should have asked this before we did the straw poll, but what happens?
No questions now, Darren. Just kidding.
What happens if the public hearing tonight, we hear some new information? We're okay to change our straw poll at some point, right?
Of course, it's just
Okay.
a straw poll. Yeah.
Thanks.
I mean, we take a formal vote next week, and that will be it. But at least now staff can move forward with a balanced budget, and we know where everything's coming from and going. And I think for the most part, again, you're right, we will have public comment tonight, but we've addressed a lot of the concerns that I think each of us have heard from our constituents throughout the whole couple of months of CIP. But of course, we have another meeting next week, we have another work session, and then the formal session. So if something changes, we still have that ability. Okay. Are
Right.
there?
I'll
Madam
email
Chair.
out an updated funding log and list these changes just so you have a written copy.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, Chris?
I'd just say that however, even those straw polls aren't binding, if people do think about changing their minds because we've taken a poll, like I hope that my colleagues will let people know as soon as possible so that we can work on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else on CIP?
We are almost right on time, Chairperson Fowler. We still have responses from the administration to the several policy questions and a couple updates that I think the council would be keenly interested in. But given the time, we could pick up there next Tuesday.
No, go ahead. We have time.
Okay. I'll turn it over to Director Thomas. And the responses from the administration are attached to the staff report. It is attachment 12.
Hi, thanks for having me. Are there any questions as far as those responses?
Council members? I'm getting down to the page in my staff report. Hold, please.
I will add the first two questions. I think it probably makes sense to jump to number 3 since we just talked about ARPA, which is one of the first two questions.
Gosh, what page is this on? I had it earlier. Council members, anybody? No questions. Blake's here, ready, on the spot. We've got nothing for him. Aha.
That is okay with me, Chair Fowler.
You know what that means, Blake? It means that you provided such good answers, written answers, that everyone is so well informed they don't have any questions for you now.
Thank you. I'm on standby if you need me.
Thanks, Blake. Ben, were there other updates that you wanted to give us real quick on CIP? The keenly interesting ones?
I did want to point out the response from the administration for supporting constituent applications. The administration's response includes additional resources that have not previously existed for constituents that are interested in CIP. And this partly arose out of constituent comments to the CDCIP Resident Advisory Board, where some constituents felt that they had more or less support than other applicants. There was also discussion about geographic equity in that some areas of the city seem to apply for CIP funding more than others. And this is something I've heard from a couple of council members as well, is making more support available so that any area of the city, whether they have the expertise or the free time to apply, if they have the interest, the city can support their idea. I don't want to get ahead of CAN since it's an interesting idea if they'd like to review the concept a little further with you.
Yeah, I appreciate that response, Blake, to question number 4. And am interested sort of in your thoughts on supporting constituent applications and making sure that we do have equity in these applications and the people applying for them.
Sure. Yeah, I think as outlined in that response, a low-hanging fruit, I think, is to have all the CIP projects in a centralized GIS type of database so that we can then be able to do some quick equity analysis as far as whether that be zip code, neighborhood, or other demographic information to first see the state of affairs, how those dollars are spent and spread out through the community. And then based on the information and data that we receive from that, that's where we're tentatively proposing and welcome any suggestions, recommendations, or feedback as it relates to a little more aggressive marketing in multiple languages, and then also the ability for our CIP staff to go into the community to those areas where we see there isn't as much funding or applications occurring, and have FaceTime where you sit down and walk through, you know, what makes a good project, what are the eligibility parameters, and a real kind of step-by-step how to apply. So we hope that that will help level the playing field as far as the dollars that are being distributed. But I would first say is, you know, we would love to do that and think that's the right thing to do regardless, but we'll also be happy to report back on what we find when we put all these projects in a database and see how the dollars are spread across our entire city.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. Great. Council members or Ben, any other closing thoughts on CIP?
That's everything I have. I'm always willing to keep talking about CIP. But if you have any thoughts between today and Tuesday, just let me know. I'm happy to brainstorm or give you a quick response.
Great. All right. Looks like, kiddos, we have a break until 4 o'clock. So there you go. 5, 6. Item number 6, where we will hear a briefing on amending city code pertaining to fence, wall, and hedge height requirements. We have Nick Tarbett from the council office here, along with Chrissy Gilmore, the the principal planner, John Anderson, planning manager, and Nick Norris, our planning director. Nick, I will turn the time over to you.
All right, thanks, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, this is a briefing about a proposal to amend the zoning ordinance to remove the special exception process that allows for overheight fences, and it will define instances where a taller fence may be appropriate and approved by right. This may sound familiar, special exception. There's a public hearing on a related text amendment in the public hearing tonight on this, but this is a separate petition that's being processed. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Chrissy to fill in the details.
So thank you. So we can go to the next slide. So currently fences, walls, and hedges are limited to 4 feet in front yards and 6 feet in the side and rear yards in all zoning districts. And though an overheight fence can be approved through the special exception process, excess fence height is generally not approved, and it's really only approved in limited circumstances. So this amendment is to remove that special exception process and then define specific instances where overheight fences would be acceptable or approved. So next slide.
Chrissy, can I interrupt you real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Never mind. You're going to answer my question. Go ahead.
So the proposed amendments to special exceptions and fence height zoning code are primarily intended to provide uniformity and clear expectations to the public for when an overheight fence, wall, or hedge is appropriate, as well as to remove the complicated special exception process. Fences are one of our more controversial applications between abutting property owners, and that's partly because of the difficulty in processing special exceptions and being consistent through applications. So removing the special exception process would provide consistency and clarity in the application of the zoning ordinance. It would also provide equity in our applications. Special exceptions for fence height are one of the top applications that we receive, and that's not spread equally throughout the city. So another role is to reduce staff time as well as equity in our planning processes. Next slide. So key changes, as I mentioned, is to remove that special exception process. And then this would replace it with in residential districts, limiting fence height to 4 feet between the front property line and primary facade of the principal structure that contains the primary entrance, and 6 feet behind the primary structure. So you can see in this graphic, behind the green line, it's 6 feet, and before it is 4 feet. Next slide. And then in non-residential districts, it's essentially the same thing. A maximum height between the front property line and primary facade of the principal structure would be 4 feet. And when located behind the primary facade of the principal structure, it'd be 6 feet. In heavy manufacturing or extractive industry zones, fences, wall, or hedges could be up to 6 feet in height, up to the front setback line. And in districts where there is no maximum or no minimum front yard setback in the underlying zone, such as the D2 zone, a fence, wall, or hedge at a maximum of 6 feet in height could be placed 10 feet from the property line. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we determined specific instances where overheight fences may be appropriate, and these were determined by reviewing best practices, case studies from other cities, discussions with other city divisions, and in response to public input received. So the first is when adjacent to non-residential zoning districts. So when a property in a residential zone, an FR, SR, or R1 zone, abuts a property in a commercial, downtown, manufacturing, or special purpose zone, the side or rear yard can exceed that 6 foot maximum and can go up to 8 feet in height. The second is public facilities, such as water treatment plants, which would be allowed to be up to 12 feet in height if 80% transparent above a height of 6 feet. And public facilities is intended to tie to our definitions in the zoning code. So we actually define what a utility building or structure is in the code, and that is public utility services for water, sewer, flooding, pump stations, reservoirs, water treatment plants, water storage tanks, and so forth. So, next slide, please. Oh, actually stay on this one. And then recreation facilities, I'm sorry, such as parks or open spaces could have fences up to 10 feet if a height above if 80% transparent above a height of 6 feet. And similarly, we also define parks and open spaces in our code and exactly what that would apply to. In specific instances where a height is necessary for public safety to contain recreation equipment, they could go higher and they would need to provide evidence of that height and why it is necessary to protect the public. Okay, next slide. So the draft also includes allowances for temporary construction fencing, decorative pillars, arches, and trellises, as well as barbed wire fencing. I won't go into each one of those in detail, but I'm happy to answer questions if you do have them. And then finally, during the public comment period, it was clear that removing any means to grant an overheight fence was not supported. So the last item was added in response to public comment. And this is an allowance for additional height that gives the PC, the Planning Commission, the authority to determine an overheight fence is necessary as part of the conditional use application. And this is also allowed through the plan development process. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that was fast, but I wanted to leave time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chrissy. Council members.
Madam Chair?
I heard someone, Darren.
Yeah, so thanks, Chrissy. So the height allowances in most cases will not change. We're just removing that special exception process that residents will apply for and almost always get denied. Am I understanding that, the gist of this?
Yeah, that's correct. So in residential and non-residential districts, it's essentially the same. They'll still be limited to that 4 feet in the front and 6 feet in the back. And then these few, I think it's 9 instances, are pretty rare when they would come up.
Now, I do have a question. If a resident chooses to build a fence within their buildable area, could they go above this? Is this just fences on the property line? So if they have, like in an R1 district, 8 feet on one side and 4 feet on the other, and they actually move their fence in, could they go up to as tall as
Yeah,
allows?
so the existing code does allow that. It allows overheight fences in the buildable area. This draft would remove that because of it saying that forward of the primary facade to the property line and then rear of the primary facade. So this wouldn't allow any overheight fences in the front or back, regardless of the buildable area.
Okay. That, I guess I would want to look at the I'll have to look at the text of that a little bit deeper because I could see that causing some problems, but I'll take a look at it before I ask more questions. Thanks.
Madam
Anna?
Chair, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Chrissy, so just remind me of just I've been having issues with my email, guys. I have to go to IMS, so I haven't been able to see the staff report. But can you remind me of? So when we say 8-foot fences, it kind of scares me because it just says fences, and I don't know how it looks like. It to me could be an 8-foot wall.
Mm-hmm.
Are these solid walls? Or are we talking about see-through iron fences in some instances?
Yeah, so each one is
this could
different.
look like a fort. When I was a planner, I had to go through one of these ones, and it looked like a fort, but we had to approve it anyway. Go ahead, Chrissy. Sorry.
That's okay. So it really depends. So for example, like B, public facilities above a height of 6 feet would have to be 80% transparent. But A, it doesn't have that provision. It just says an 8-foot fence or wall. But that one actually is only allowed in the rear or side yard. But the rest of them, like recreation facilities, private game courts, construction fencing, they require some level of transparency.
Okay, that's good to know. And then the second question is this amendment that we're looking at to special, is this something that we generated, or was it public, or was it the planning division that says, hey, we've got a lot of this special exceptions requests?
Yeah, this was generated by the city council to go along with it. Oh, I'm sorry, you cut out and I didn't mean to interrupt you. That this was generated by the city council.
No, that's fine. Okay, okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Council members, any other questions?
Madam Chair, I have one quick question. How is this applied on a corner lot?
So on corner lots, it would still apply that behind the front facade would be 6 feet, and then forward of the front facade would be 4 feet. Doing my case study review, it's kind of 50-50 with whatever city you look at, how they choose to handle that.
To follow
Darren?
up on, thanks, Madam Chair. To follow up on Dennis's question, so the applicant would just choose which facade is their front facade, and that one would be required 4 feet, and then the other side would be allowed 6. So there could be a 6-foot fence adjacent to a sidewalk, but not both sidewalks. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. The facade with the primary entrance would be the primary facade, and then the other one would be the secondary facade that could have a 6-foot fence.
And is that, oh, never mind, thanks.
Council members, any other questions? Nick, you're not a council member. Just kidding.
I know I'm not.
Go ahead.
And I'm thankful for that. But I did want to make one comment. And Chrissy touched on how this is very closely tied to the special exception proposal as well. And I just wanted to bring it to the council's attention that there is a statement in the existing fence height regulations that authorizes a special exception. And because these were tracking at 2 different times and they were 2 different petitions, the special exception proposal doesn't remove that link. The fence height proposal does. And so because initially we were hoping that we would be able to keep them on the same timeline, but since that hasn't happened, we may have run into an issue where the code, the fence height section, is authorizing a special exception without any standards or process if the special exception gets adopted first. One thing that there's an easy solution to that we can add to the special exception. I know it's slated for a public hearing tonight and potential action next week. So I just wanted to bring that up to the council is that if the special exception stuff stays on that agenda for next week, we will probably add in a deletion of that reference to the special exception. So we're not stuck in a situation where the code is saying an application can happen, but there's no standards or limits, which means someone could do whatever they want. And so
Question for you. If we just moved the potential action of the special exception to September 21st, when we're slated to have potential action on this, would that also remove any concerns?
It does. It does create some other issues for pending applications right now.
Okay.
Because applicants are in this weird gray area where they don't know if they're going to need the special exception, but they want to retain that right. And so we're kind of holding some applications. And if we let those go, then we end up holding those longer, or they end up having to go through with it, even though in 6 weeks they may not have to do it. And so our preference would be to try to make that fix if the council keeps that action date with the special exception for next week. Then we'd like to try to just remove that at that time so we avoid that issue. But that's completely up to the city council, obviously.
Cindy?
I think we could probably work with the attorney's office and Nick to come up with some language that that holds on the one piece of the ordinance and makes it become effective once the other is adopted, or something like that, so that you're not taking out something if you want it later. So I think that either we can do what Nick suggested at first, or a slight modification that kind of gives you the best of both worlds, if we can figure that out. So we could try that, if that's all right with the council.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I don't want to hold up applications any further. So I appreciate that, Nick. Kind of, yeah, we'll figure out the language there that needs to happen so we don't put ourselves in a conundrum. Great. Council members, anything else here? Thank you, Nick and Chrissy, for joining us and our Nick Tarbett. We'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is a rezone at Nelson Estates at 833 West Hoyt Place. And we have Brian Fulmer from the council office and Eric Dames, our senior planner on this. And I don't know if our applicant may or may not be here, but I will let Brian speak to that. Brian, the time's all yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, this is a proposal to rezone the properties. They are currently zoned R1 5000 and R1 7000 single-family residential, and the applicant would like to change those to both parcels to SR3, which is Special Development Pattern Residential District. The applicant expressed interest in a planned development, which includes preserving the existing home and adding a twin home as well as 4 single-family attached homes. All of the homes the proposed homes would be for sale at market rate. I will now turn the time over to Eric from planning, and he can let us know if the applicant is on with us.
Thanks, council members. And yes, Sitar Tabriz is here representing this project, and I'm not sure if he's got his counterpart with him, but Sitar Tabriz is the applicant and he's here. So we'll give him some time here in a minute. But yeah, so looks like we got this slideshow pulling up here. So as was mentioned, this is a request to rezone 2 separate parcels, one facing 200 North, which is currently zoned R1 7000, and one facing Hoyt Place, which is a private street and is currently zoned R1 5000. The property is surrounded by other SR3 development to the rear and single family on the other along 200 North, with the TSAUNT across the street to the south. It received a unanimous recommendation for approval from the Planning Commission with the conditions listed in the staff report, which we'll bring up at the end. Next slide, please. So this is just a shot of the existing properties, how they are now. The one with a single family home that is occupied, and to the rear along Hoyt Place that's undeveloped. The property is within the Northwest Community Plan and part of the North Temple Boulevard Plan. And you've got the sizes there. And let's see, go to the next slide, please. So the intention is for the property, the entire property, to be rezoned, and that a future subdivision would take place in a planned development. And although that's not part of this review and application at this time, it's anticipated that that would include a twin home and 4 single-family attached homes, and the preservation of the existing home along 200 North. Even though the property along 200 North would retain that home, it would be rezoned as it would likely there's a possibility that a driveway would need to be included from 200 North to reach the property closest to Hoyt. And with that, the entirety of the property would need to be rezoned. Next slide. Okay, so this shows that a little bit more clearly of kind of what's anticipated with the rezone, how it sits currently on the top with the R1 5000 piece and the R1 7000, and that there would likely be a future lot line subdivision which would move the property line, and then the parcel to the rear along Hoyt would become larger and have the new future development. again, this project has been in the works since 2018, and the reason we're just now seeing it is the applicant has intended to or attempted to work with surrounding property owners on creating a project that would be accessed from Hoyt and would have a shared driveway to access the properties as well on that on that rear portion, but that has not been able to happen to this point, and so they want to move forward with the rezone independently if necessary. Next slide. So this shows a little bit of kind of the concept of the single-family attached homes and the twin home with the existing single-family home to the south, and kind of the layout of that. This doesn't necessarily show how the driveway would be accomplished from 200 North. It's still their desire to work with the property owner along Hoyt Place to create a shared driveway, which is kind of represented here. The primary reason for this secondary access is because Hoyt Place is a dead-end street and it's a private street. It's limited to the number of homes that can be developed without a secondary fire access. And so the discussion with the surrounding property owner is, that if these were to go in, then it limits their potential to develop more properties, and who would, pay for the access point and whatnot. So this rezone would allow, if necessary, for access to come from 200 North just to access these homes and allow this to function somewhat independently. Next slide. So in looking at this, it really falls in line with the goals of both the North Temple Boulevard Plan and the Northwest Master Plan, which envisions these mid-block areas to be redeveloped with slightly more dense housing and to be infilled. And also this has great access to the transit stop being adjacent to that TSA zone. And so it really falls in line with those goals of both of those master plans and Plan Salt Lake. Next slide. So this kind of shows a comparison of the existing zones, R1 5000 and R1 7000. And although the lot sizes are significantly larger there, the intended uses are compatible. They definitely are a little more dense, but nothing out of scale as far as size with what's permitted in the R1 5000 or R1 7000. The key difference being that the SR3 would allow for the single family attached homes or twin homes, which would not be permitted in the R1 zones. And the lot sizes would be allowed to be reduced, which allows for that greater density as well. But the heights and that are not out of character with what's there. Next slide. So again, this received a unanimous recommendation from the Planning Commission, and there was 2 conditions which I wanted to point out. One is to record a development agreement to protect the home along along 200 North, that existing home, so that it stays there and remains a single family home, to kind of preserve that character and help tie in with the existing development. And then the next is more of a statement of encouragement that the applicant continue to work with the surrounding property owner to see if there is a way to come to resolution to have access from Hoyt Place and have them have a shared access from there. We think it'd make it a better project, but regardless, if that can't be accomplished, we still think this is a good idea to be able to move forward with this rezone and potential plan development. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Eric. And we generally, since the applicant is here, I can give 5 minutes to the applicant if he would like to say anything about this project or the rezone. So I will turn, and if not, that's fine too. But I will turn the time over to Sitar if you want to take a few minutes.
No, we go exactly with what Eric says. Basically, it's just a recommendation. Don't have anything else to add to it, really.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you for being here. Council members, any questions? No questions. I guess my only question, and I didn't look at the Planning Commission's report necessarily, I looked at the staff report, but was there negative or positive community feedback on this project? Minus the driveway issue on Hoyt, or the sort of who's gonna pay for that you already brought up, Eric?
Yeah, so the community feedback was primarily directed towards the planned development and what those homes might look like, and the subdivision, and making sure that any development was in scale with the existing development. And there was comments on potential of affordable housing from one group, and just wanting to make sure that building heights and things like that didn't get out of whack. But there was, as far as the rezone, there was no community comments that were directed specifically to the rezone.
Great, thank you. Council members, anything else? Darren?
Yeah, I appreciate the presentation, Eric, and I mean, it seems to me like the project as proposed would be not too out of character of the neighborhood, and it would add some additional housing density. I just had one quick question, and this might be more of a zoning philosophy question. But with the existing single-family house being maintained, I'm just reading the purpose statement of SR3, and that is to provide a zone that's for development located on the interior portion of city blocks, which makes sense, but was it not, would it not allow the project if that was split up, just the first part stayed as a single family zone and the part behind was the SR3? Is it a density issue at that point that they couldn't get the 6 additional units, or does that make sense for my question? Because it seems like it makes sense for the interior portions to be SR3, but that along 200 North maybe also makes sense. I'm just wondering why, if there's a single family house and we're keeping a single family house, why rezone the entire portion rather than split it into 2 separate parcels and have a separate zone in the back?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that there's 2 parts to that answer. One, it's absolutely not unprecedented for the SR3 to reach all the way out to the street. It's not just limited, and it's in my staff report. I don't have it right in front of me right now how many other times that happens, but it's quite a few times that happens throughout the city. The second part is that so if the driveway needs to go in to access the rear portion, that driveway has to have the zoning that would allow, the driveway has to be in the same zone as what it leads to, the development. So it could not be a driveway across an R1 zone leading to those single family row attached homes and twin home. That wouldn't be allowed. And so that is one reason the front portion needs to be rezoned if a driveway is going to cross this. That answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. If not for the driveway issue, though, they could still build the 6 units behind.
Yes, they would. Well, they would still want to do a future either lot line adjustment or subdivision to take a little bit of that property.
Sure.
But yeah, and otherwise, in theory, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Sitar, for being here. Appreciate both of you. We will move on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item number 8, a briefing on permitting restaurants in the public lands zoning district. We have Brian Fulmer here with us again, and Amanda Roman, who is the principal planner. I will turn the time over to Brian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This proposed zoning text amendment from Mayor Mendenhall's office would add restaurants as a permitted use within the public lands zoning district. Currently, restaurants are not allowed as permitted or conditional uses within the zone, but are accessory uses to serve and contribute to the principal use of whatever buildings are there. With that, I will turn it over to Amanda.
Hi, thank you for the overview. As Brian mentioned, this is a mayor-initiated petition. It was in response to conversations had with local business owners during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic last year, specifically with the City Bird Cafe, which is located in the City and County building. The City and County property is on public lands, which allows restaurants to operate as this accessory use, but not as a standalone entity. So as Brian mentioned, the accessory uses have to be subordinate to and serve a principal use. So in this case, the cafe can't remain open if the city and county building is closed, which posed a problem when it has been closed for a long time due to the pandemic. So the mayor asked planning staff to review the potential impacts of adding restaurants as a permitted use within the zone, allowing this restaurant and potentially more to remain open and operate as a standalone entity. So the public land zone requires permitted uses to be located on lots with a minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet. I pulled the parcel data, and of nearly 2,400 parcels in the city, there are approximately 113 that are zoned public lands and also over 20,000 square feet. The zone has a limited number of permitted uses. These include government facilities, schools, which is an overwhelming it's the main use in the public land zone, reception centers and libraries. And then there's also some low impact uses that are permitted, such as gardens and public parks. So during the public comment period, there were some concerns raised that the existing public parks would be commercialized by allowing them to have restaurants on their property. So while the public land zone does permit parks, the majority of public parks, including Liberty or Pioneer, Sugar House Park, are actually within the open space zoning district rather than the public lands zoning district. So they would not be impacted by the proposed text amendment. And then the intent of the text amendment is to activate existing buildings and public spaces that may be underutilized and encourage a greater use of properties that typically only support daytime uses. The proposal is not expected to create additional impacts that couldn't be mitigated through existing zoning regulations. And then through the review, the 2 properties identified as being the most likely to meet these underlying zoning districts, including lot width and building setbacks, would of course be the city and county building and potentially the Bees Stadium property, but a full zoning review would have to be completed for each site. And the Planning Commission did forward a positive recommendation. That is the final of my presentation. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Questions, Darren?
What was the criteria that identified the Bees Stadium and the City and County building as the only 2 likely options for that?
No, not necessarily likely. So when I was doing the review, I just pulled parcels over 20,000 square feet that were zoned public lands and then separated out. So there's the permitted uses in the zone have to have a minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet, and then schools are permitted on lots over 5 acres. And the data is a little different because, for example, some schools cross a few boundary lines, and there's smaller parcels that make up schools, and so there probably are more less full properties than there are parcels that would support the use. But the city and county building and the stadium based off of being city-owned property. That's why I would, you need to do a full zoning review I didn't review lot width. I didn't review setbacks or anything like that. I just looked at actual square footage.
Right. Well, I certainly want City Bird Cafe to be able to operate, and I would love to get restaurants in the Bees Stadium. So based on that, I think this is a great proposal.
Dan?
Thank you very much on the presentation. I'm agreeing with Darren also. My one question, I thought I might have read it in the report, but I can't remember. Alcohol license, would they be allowed to have serve alcohol at the restaurants? Because I don't know if they are now.
Oh, so that would bring in a whole other set of regulations, right? So even if it was zoned public lands, for example, if they were close to a school, it doesn't matter what the zoning is, it would be a completely different review process. So potentially, but just depending on the site.
Okay, they'd have to apply and
Okay.
have to go through all the rest of it. It wouldn't be disallowed just because they're on the public land building.
No, it would just be a different process. They'd have to meet X,
Okay.
Y, and Z.
Other questions?
Yeah, Madam
James?
Chair, I might have glossed over this, but I know we've had discussions in the past with this. I'm glad that this came forward from the mayor's office. What about the regional athletic complex? Would this affect that so that there could be a possibility of having a restaurant out there? I know they do food trucks, but there isn't a current facility for that.
I do not know no, it would not. I'm working on a different amendment for that property, but no, they are zoned open space.
Open space.
So,
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Portions of the athletic complex are zoned PL. I think where the arena is, or the stadium part of it. So there is a potential for that at that in that segment of it. But Amanda's right, the majority of it is zoned open space.
Open space. That's great. Hopefully that it does comply with setbacks and everything like that. So if there is a possibility of doing it, we can.
Council members, other questions?
No, just a comment, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
So on the open space, I am interested in looking at if we don't have that yet. I think we talked about additional uses on parks or open space zoning districts. And I'm not sure where we're on that, but that will be something, a suggestion from me to the rest of the council if we would like to revisit those types of uses on in parks, open space zoning districts. That might be beneficial to activate those areas, not to different activities. So maybe Brian knows about this, or I'm not sure who from our staff has any idea where that conversation went, or if we officially had it at some point. Brian, do you
Staff will look into that. I don't have information right off the top of my head for you, but we'll look into that and get back to you.
Okay, that's something that I would love to see. Go ahead.
So the city council did adopt some changes to the open space zones. I want to say it was about 2 years ago now. And one of the proposals that the planning commission did not recommend as part of that was to add allowing restaurants and things like that to the open space zone and parks over a certain size. And so that was identified when we brought that to the city council, and the city council did not add it to the changes. So it would be a new process. There's nothing pending right now for that.
Oh, okay, Nick, thank you for the clarification. So now we know. Thank you.
And actually, I thought there was something pending. You might want to do a straw poll if there is interest on the council so that we know whether to follow up with something more formal with planning.
I'm curious from Nick, was there a specific reasoning for not including that?
Boy, I can't remember. Our proposal at the staff level was to include it in the larger parks to add some flexibility. and to address things where they're already happening in some of the larger parks. And I think part of that came from the in Sugar House Park, the Rose Center, Garden Center building that wanted to convert. And for whatever reason, the Planning Commission, I think they felt it was too hard to come up with some sort of standards or issues with that, or ways to address any kind of impact. I think they just didn't know, and so I think that's probably why they recommended not to include it. But I would have to go back and check those notes. That's off the top of my head memory.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is specific for restaurants. Was any other business types looked at to open up on PLs on public land? Or was it just specifically restaurants, or did we think about other businesses?
No, this proposal was for
Just
restaurants.
narrowed to restaurants?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, no, just like Cindy suggested, to do a straw poll to see if we can continue visiting this additional uses in open space.
Is that your straw poll?
Yes.
Does everyone understand the straw poll? Any discussion on it? Show your feelings. That is unanimous. Okay.
Thank you.
In support. Sorry, I should have said that part. Great. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us. And we'll move on to the next item. Our next item is just informational, and it's the honorary street name Pastor France Davis Way. And at the table we have Brian, and I believe the mayor is going to speak to this as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, excuse me, there is a resolution attached to this, so it will come to the council, or you will be voting on that.
Tonight? In a
No.
meeting.
Yes. And it's a proposal initiated by the Calvary Missionary Baptist Church to recognize Pastor France Davis for his many years of community service. The proposal would add the honorary street name Pastor France Davis Way to the block of Harvard Avenue between State and Main Streets, which is adjacent to the Calvary Baptist Church. The official street name would not be changed under the proposal, but this would be an honorary name similar to others in the city. So now I will turn the time over to Mayor Mendenhall or Rachel. They are here and would like to.
Thanks, Brian.
To that.
Yeah, I'm happy actually that we're jointly proposing this to you, council, with Calvary Baptist Church Ministry and the community there. I feel honored in the course of my life to know France Davis and have learned from him, and to be able to rely on his good counsel many times. He is a remarkable man, and he continues to serve well beyond the mission at Calvary Baptist Church since his retirement. As you know, as a court commissioner on the Commission on Racial Equity and Policing, but through many, many other facets of community engagement from the state level down to the most neighborhood and local. He's had many different degrees bestowed upon him through his own work, and also through honorary degrees from, I think, every university in the state of Utah. And he acted as a member of the Board of Corrections, and then he was the chair of the Board of Corrections. He was on the Utah State Board of Regents for a decade and was the vice chair in his last year of that tenure. And he was also the founding chair of the Utah Opportunities Industrialization Training Center. He's just one of the most remarkable humanitarians, civil rights leaders, social justice advocates that has walked in the state of Utah, and I'm grateful that he continues to work with us at the city level to make lasting positive change. So I hope that you too have relationships and experiences with this incredible person, and that you'll support this renaming, this honorary naming of the street there at Calvary Baptist Church. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council members, is there anything anyone would like to say? I see lots of smiles, and I think those smiles probably indicate just an echo of what Mayor Mendenhall just said, that if you are lucky enough to know Pastor Davis, then you have a very bright spot in your heart from everything that he gives and does for each of us individually, as you talk to him as a friend and a mentor, and collectively as a society. So echoing your words, Madam Mayor, we are so, I personally, and I believe based on the looks of the faces of my council members, can speak for my council members, are incredibly supportive of this honorary naming, and look grateful for Pastor Davis's continued work with the city. So if there's anything else anyone would like to say, please. And if not, we'll move on. Great. We will take a formal vote on this next week, FYI.
Yes, there is a public hearing that is on tonight. Well, tonight's consent agenda, you will set the date for public hearing next Tuesday and potential vote that night as well.
Great. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, we are on to our advice and consent, our board appointments. So I saw Kristen Riker here. I know we're a little bit early, but I did see your tile, so I'm going to call on you now, Kristen. So Kristen is, this is our interview for her to take the position of the director of the newly formed Public Lands Department. Kristen, I'll turn the time over to you just to give a little snippet. We all know you pretty well, I believe, but to give a snippet of yourself and anything you want to say to the council, and then I'll turn it to council for any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I hadn't really planned anything to share, but I'll give you a little bit of my background. So I've worked for Salt Lake City for the past 6 years, really in the same position I'm in now, although my title has changed and public lands has changed over time. I am honored to work in such a capacity, working for the city and the residents of Salt Lake City. Prior to that, I worked for Salt Lake County for just over 20 years. I operated their recreation side of the parks and recreation, and oversaw all the rec centers and the programming, all sorts of things, Wheeler Farm, ice rinks, things like that. So I've lived in Salt Lake City for just over 25 years, and I live in the Sugar House area, and truly love this community and the city, and am honored to have worked for the Public Lands Department, and on behalf of the mayor and the council to improve our parks and our trails and our urban forestry, and now our golf courses. So that's all I have about me. If there's other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Council members, any questions for Kristen? Chris.
Hi, Kristen. I appreciate all the hard work that you've done for the county and the city, and I know you've been a great resource to me when I've had questions and needed things last minute. So I just want to start by thanking you for that and acknowledging the hard work that you've done to get here. My question for you is, now that Parks, is a department of the city, how do you think, we do a lot of engagement with, different surveys or with our Reimagine parks and public lands. And, I know there's going to be more of that going on with the foothills as we move into phase 2 and 3. Is there a way to encourage more citizen engagement? And I'm thinking like through the peanut board specifically to kind of give them, to elevate their status along with the status of the department. And how do you see that working? And what do you see for that group as kind of the oversight and advisory group for this area?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, so the peanut board has evolved over the last, really the last year. All of our founding members are no longer on the peanut board, and we've added several new members to that board, which is really fun and exciting. Recently, with the Foothill Trails, we've had a lot more public engagement than we've ever had, which is great, and we welcome that. One of the things that I encourage our board members to do is to be our conduit between public lands and their communities, and also, to share information, things that are going on in their community, but also to share what we're working on and what we're thinking back out into the community. And so with that, gosh, not this summer, but last summer, we usually don't meet in July, and we met individually with all the board members that we could, and asked them, how can we get more involved? How can we get more people involved in the board? And out of that, we ended up with several new ideas and the formation of a couple friends group. One of those is the Friends of Salt Lake City Cemetery, which has brought a lot more input into how our cemetery is operating, and just generating some community ideas around the cemetery. Friends of Poplar Grove. No, yeah, Poplar Grove is a newer one that is just starting. And Friends of, well, there's several different friends groups. Sorry, I'm not able to share all of them right now, but yeah, that's one way to bring people into the board. We've always had the Friends of Fairmont working really hard. That was our first board. And so I think, to bring more people into communication with public lands, we would love to work and continue to work with our board members, and not just board members, but community members, to start more friends groups to represent their parks and their interests, whether it's a natural land or a trail or the cemetery or whatever that might be. But pulling more people in to hear more voices is so important. Engagement in a diverse group is essential to our planning process to ensure that our parks and our public spaces are created by the people that they're intended to serve. And everybody deserves similar levels of access to our good parks, and we want to hear from folks, what that means to them and what it looks like.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris and Kristen. Council members, any other questions?
Madam Chair, sorry. I'd just like to say that having worked with Kristen for the last 6 years, in my time prior to the council being on the peanut board, so since she entered the scene here, and every bit of it has been a joy. So I really appreciate having worked with her for so long, and how effective she's been. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Kristen, you will be on tonight's agenda. So thank you for joining us and for being here and for all of your hard work with the city. And we look forward to more of that hard work. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Our next board appointment is to the Business Advisory Board. And we have Scott Little here with us. I hope I said that correctly, Scott.
Yep.
Perfect. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are interested on being on the Business Advisory Board, if you don't mind?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. I guess the interest on being on the board is I talked to Darren, who chairs the board, probably 5 or 6 months ago or something like that, and just kind of got excited about the direction that the board was going. I'll give you a little bit of my history, I guess. So I'm Scott Little. I own Tea's Auntie, kind of European style tea and wine cafe and sugar house. We just recently kind of opened in this new location. So for me personally, we're very invested in Salt Lake City and seeing Salt Lake City grow and seeing Sugar House become a kind of true business hub. Because we bought the property and then we brought the business there and made substantial investment into the property. So for me, it's kind of that kind of personal and trying to kind of continue to make Salt Lake City just a great spot. Prior to Tea's Auntie, I worked at Tracy Aviary. I was the deputy director over at Tracy Aviary. Worked very closely with Tim Brown, the executive director there. Spent I guess about 3 years there. Prior to that, kind of just a couple of other nonprofit jobs. I spent 17 years or so in nonprofit management. Prior to starting a career, I got my MBA from St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. Yeah, I moved out here. I've been in Utah probably 15 years or so now, and in Salt Lake, I think for 11 of those years. That's me.
Thank you, Scott. And I just want you to know how much I love Tea's Auntie. And Scott does a great job, and Tea's Auntie does such a great job at hosting events, community events, pop-up stores. Over Christmas last year, there was tons of pop-up stores for different businesses, including a lot of businesses owned by communities of color and community owned by women. So, and really supports all of those small businesses, even though he's still a small business. Like, just it's awesome, and does a lot of work within the community. Just hosted the Mural Fest, the beginning of Mural Fest. I was there for a little bit. So thank you so much for what you are doing for Sugar House and what kind of that small business infusion that we love here in Sugar House, kind of bringing that back and to life again. So thank you so much for that, Scott.
Yeah, thank you. And that's one of our goals is kind of to be a community hub. And yeah, Salt Lake City is Sugar House. Yeah, been able to get involved with the chamber over there, with Landon and Brandon over there. So it's kind of been a good stepping stone.
That's great. Council members, any other questions or comments for Scott? Okay. Well, Scott, you will be on our consent agenda tonight. You do not have to log in unless you want to, but we really look forward to you being on the advisory board, and just thank you for your volunteering to work with the city and help the city be better at what we do. It really takes all of us to make it work and make us better. So thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for the chance.
Our next board appointment is Mike Pazzi. And I see that Michael is here with us. So I will turn the time over to you, Mike. And we're looking at a board appointment for the Housing Authority of Salt Lake City. So if you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested on that in that particular board, that'd be great.
Can you hear me all right? Good. Okay. Thumbs up. Well, I see a lot of young faces, and I have a lot of history because I'm a lot older than you guys. So I'm going to try to make this brief and hopefully slightly interesting. I'm very interested in that board because I'm very interested in sustainable housing. And I think that that's really the secret to getting, so many of our homeless people back and up and going and into jobs and self-sustainment. So when Brenda Koga asked me to be on the board, I thought, what a great, opportunity. And for us to find all of those ways, and creatively think about how we do that. you know, what the best way is to do that. But for my background, I'm a 48-year banker. I probably shouldn't have stayed 48 years. I was 16 years with Bank of America in Los Angeles, and then I spent another 32 with Wells Fargo. I arrived here in 1996 as the president of what was Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, but what was then First Interstate Bank. And I was no longer no sooner in the chair than probably 3 months later, we were hostily acquired by Wells Fargo, only to be acquired by Norwest in 98. Then we bought First Security in 2000. And then, as you all know, we bought Wachovia in 2008. So to be a banker and to actually still have a seat through all of that was pretty amazing. But my whole background is in probably the guts of it in commercial real estate lending. So I will offer, you know, some hopefully, you know, insights and wisdom into the things that we would like to do and making sure that they're financially well thought out, you know, and they're economically viable. So I tell you, I love Salt Lake. We never thought in a million years we'd live here 25 years. I raised my daughters here, and now I've got one on the way, but I've got 4, you know, grandchildren, and they're all boys. I raised girls, so it's quite different, as many of you may know. Boys punch you in the nose and play with you tomorrow. You know, they're just great. But anyway, I have loved living in Salt Lake, and I've had the pleasure to serve and to be chair of several boards in the city as well. So I'll leave that up to you for questions.
Yes, council members, any questions or comments? Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your desire to work with the city and to, like I just said to Scott, to help us be better. It really does take residents and people serving on these boards and commissions to help us do the very best we can as elected officials and as people who work within the city. We rely on our boards and commissions to help us. So thank you so much for wanting to volunteer and take on this position. It certainly means a lot to us and look forward to your expertise. Anything else, council members? Okay, Mike, you will be on our consent agenda tonight. You do not have to log in if you'd like, if you don't want. And we look forward to having you on the board.
Oh, thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. And thank all of the council members.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, council members, we are on to our standing items. Report from the chair and vice chair. I don't know if I have anything. James, do you have anything? Got a thumbs down from James. Report announcements from our executive director. Cindy, do you have anything?
I don't think so.
Faster
than I thought. Thank you.
Of course. And then I can't remember if we decided or did not decide that we needed a closed session tonight.
We thought that you wouldn't have time. It was a property question. Obviously, you do have time if you want to spend a few minutes. The people we would need for that would be City Attorney's Office and Director Riker. If you'd like to spend a quick minute to get some information. I think Laura Briefer was going to join, but I'm not sure if she's
Laura's title is still on, so she may be able to join us. Council members, we do have a couple extra minutes if we want to go into a closed session regarding this. So I'll look for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we go into closed session for the purpose of receiving advice of counsel and
real property
acquisition.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Wharton and a second by Councilmember Mono. I will roll call this. Councilmember Wharton.
Yes.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yes.
Councilmember Mono.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Ferris.
Yes.
And I am a yes, so we will enter closed session. Do we need to stay here or is there another link?
Let's stay here. We weren't planning on a closed session, so we didn't set up a separate WebEx. So if you just give us a little bit of time to sort through the tiles and make sure the people who need to be here are here and the ones who aren't not.
Okay, Jen, do you want to just holler when we think we're ready?
Yes, I can do that.
Like, well, what does facing discrimination mean as far as trying to get an apartment? Like, what is that? What can that look like?
What we typically see in the state of Utah is when someone's viewing an apartment, looking to purchase a home, that the landlord might tell them one thing where they would tell another person of another identity something completely different. And so in the most recent data, there was over 28,000 complaints of housing discrimination in the United States. And unfortunately, it's a lot higher than that. It's in the millions of people that think that they were discriminated against in any way. And the numbers keep going up every year. Is unfortunately there's an uptick in housing related hate activity. And there's also been an increase, unfortunately, in hate crimes involving people who have been harassed in their neighborhoods or at home. And then with mortgage denials and approvals, there's unfortunately been people based on their racial and ethnic identities been charged higher interest rates, higher deposits, higher rents. And that's something that is banned in the Fair Housing Act. And so hopefully we can continue to get the word out that this isn't something that needs to happen.
Is this available to anyone? What are the criteria that we would need to use to be able to qualify for getting help from the city or any of these other partners to access the Fair Housing Act if we feel like we've been discriminated against? And what resources are there for us to do that?
We'd encourage anyone to contact the advocates in the state if they feel they've been discriminated against. They don't need proof. They just need if they feel they've been discriminated against in any way. So there's the Disability Law Center. And so their number